Priya shifted uncomfortably on the hard mattress. Her new apartment was small, just a single room with a tiny kitchen, but it was cheap, and that was all that mattered in Delhi. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, throwing dust motes into sharp relief. Priya unpacked the last of her boxes, her gaze drawn to the window. It faced another building, old and dilapidated. It stood silent and watchful. The building opposite seemed to be completely abandoned. Paint peeled from its walls and windows were boarded up or shattered. Priya wondered about its history, about the lives that had unfolded within its crumbling walls. It was strangely unsettling, yet strangely captivating. She couldn't help but feel like she was being watched. Days turned into weeks, and Priya settled into a routine. She explored the bustling streets of Delhi, savouring the spicy street food and the vibrant energy of the city. But every evening, as she returned to her apartment, her gaze would inevitably be drawn to the abandoned building. It loomed over her, a silent sentinel in the fading light. One evening, as Priya made her way up the narrow staircase to her apartment, she paused. Something was different. She glanced across the alleyway to the building opposite. In a third-floor window, a window that had been empty the day before, stood a figure. It was shrouded in shadow, its features indistinguishable. But Priya could have sworn it was staring directly at her. Priya's heart pounded in her chest. She told herself it was just her imagination, a trick of the fading light. But as she unlocked her door and stepped inside, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease. She drew the curtains, shutting out the view of the abandoned building, but the image of the shadowy figure lingered in her mind. That night, Priya slept fitfully. She tossed and turned, haunted by nightmares of shadowy figures and watchful eyes. When she woke, the sun was streaming through a gap in the curtains. She felt foolish for letting her imagination run wild. It was just an old building, she told herself. There was nothing to be afraid of. But as she washed her face and prepared for work, she couldn't help but glance nervously at the window. As the days passed, Priya tried to convince herself that she had imagined the figure in the window, but each evening as dusk settled over the city, she would find herself drawn back to the window. And each evening the figure would be there, standing silently in the shadows. Priya's fear grew with each passing night. The figure seemed to be getting closer, as if it were moving through the abandoned building towards her. She tried to rationalize her fear, telling herself it was just a trick of the light. But deep down she knew that something was wrong. Priya confided in her friend Meena about the figure in the window. Meena, a pragmatic and sensible woman, tried to reassure her. "It's probably just a homeless man seeking shelter," she said. "Don't worry, Priya, it's all in your head." Priya wanted to believe her. She desperately wanted to dismiss her fears as irrational. But the nightly appearances of the figure, its unwavering gaze, filled her with a sense of dread that she couldn't shake off. Something was wrong. She felt it in her bones. One night, Priya woke with a start. The streetlights outside her window were off, plunging the room into darkness. The air was thick with the pre-monsoon humidity, making it difficult to breathe. She could hear the distant rumble of thunder, a low growl that seemed to echo her own growing fear. And then she saw it. The figure. It was no longer in the window across the alleyway. It was right outside her window, its form a grotesque silhouette against the faint moonlight. It seemed to be pressing against the glass, its face a mask of darkness. Priya lay frozen in terror, her mind screaming. The next morning dawned bright and clear. The storm had passed, leaving behind a washed clean freshness. But Priya's fear remained, etched deeper than before. She cautiously approached the window, her heart pounding. The figure was gone, but on the fire escape outside her window, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Footprints, fresh footprints, marked clearly in the thin layer of dust. They were too large to belong to a child, too distinctly human to be anything else. Someone had been on her fire escape watching her. That night, Priya couldn't bear to be alone. She called Meena, her voice trembling as she recounted the events of the previous night. Meena, though skeptical, agreed to stay with Priya. They sat together in the dimly lit room, Priya's fear a palpable presence. Hours ticked by. The city outside slept, but Priya and Meena remained awake, their eyes fixed on the window. Suddenly, a crash from the fire escape outside shattered the silence. Priya gasped, her eyes widening in terror. Meena grabbed her hand, her own face pale. They both turned towards the window, their breath catching in their throats. Framed in the window, its face illuminated by a flash of lightning, was the figure. Its eyes, two burning coals of hate, met Priya's. It grinned, a grotesque, chillingly human grin. And then it was gone. Priya didn't scream, didn't cry out. She simply sat there, paralyzed with fear as the image of the figure's face burned itself into her mind. The next morning, Priya packed her meager belongings and fled. She didn't leave a forwarding address, didn't look back. The memory of the figure's face, its eyes burning with malice, was enough to ensure that she would never return to that apartment. The landlord, a shrewd businessman, wasted no time in finding a new tenant. A young man, eager to make his mark on the city, moved into the small apartment. He was oblivious to the terror that awaited him, but it wouldn't be long before he too would become acquainted with the haunting mystery of the man in the window.